In the silence of the forgotten pages, a prophecy of Jesus resounds, echoing through the centuries. Hidden texts reveal visions of a dark and hopeful future, a new realm that could transform everything we know. But why were these truths banned from Scripture? What is so disturbing that the Church has decided to hide it? Imagine knowing that Jesus' words contained secrets, capable of shaking the foundations of faith. Prophecies that not only predicted the end of times, but also challenged the very power of the religious institution. What else could be hidden beneath the veil of history? Prepare to delve into a deep mystery, where each revelation is a key to understanding not only the past, but also the present and the future. What would happen if you discovered that the truth is much more complex than you were taught? With each fragment rescued, a new dimension opens up, revealing unexpected connections and questions that defy logic. What did Jesus really say? And why were these words silenced? The answer could change everything. Follow along because the journey has just begun. It is interesting to think that while the Gospels are full of teachings and accounts about the life of Jesus, some prophecies that could have been included were left out. Many of these prophecies, which appear in other religious texts or in the writings of ancient prophets, have profound messages that could enrich the narrative. This leads us to question why certain texts were chosen and others left aside. Was it a conscious decision or just a question of space and relevance? Some scholars believe that the selection of texts in the Gospels was influenced by the need to present a specific image of Jesus that fit the vision of the early Christian community. This may explain the omission of some prophecies that did not align with the central message the authors wanted to convey. Thus, the prophecies that were left aside may reflect other messianic expectations that existed at the time. Furthermore, these omissions can have a significant impact on understanding the figure of Jesus. By not including certain prophecies, the narrative may seem less complex, but it may also miss important nuances about the role Jesus could have played in a broader context. This lack of information can leave many believers with questions about the entirety of the message. The search for these omitted prophecies can lead to a deeper study of the Scriptures and a new interpretation of what it really means to follow the teachings of Jesus. When we begin to explore texts that are not in the Gospels, new perspectives emerge that can enrich faith and religious understanding. This investigation is an invitation to reflect on what it means to be part of a spiritual tradition. The omitted prophecies in the Gospels show us that the history of religion is complex and nuanced. What may seem like a simple omission can actually be an opportunity to re-examine and deepen our understanding of Jesus and his message. The canonization of Scripture was a long and often controversial process. The Church played a key role in choosing which texts would be considered sacred. Early Church leaders met in councils, discussing which books should be included in the Bible. This selection was not only a question of spirituality, but also of power and control over the Christian message that would be spread. During these meetings, the Church considered the authenticity, origin, and acceptance of the texts by the Christian community. This decision had a direct impact on the formation of doctrine and the way the faithful understood their faith. Thus, the Church's influence on the canonization of Scripture has shaped not only the Bible, but also religious practice over the centuries. It is important to note that not all texts considered sacred today were immediately accepted. Some books, which are now part of the New Testament, faced resistance and were intensely debated. This leads us to reflect on how human decisions can affect spirituality and faith over time. Furthermore, canonization also generated divisions. Texts that were excluded ended up being preserved in other traditions or became apocryphal. This means that there are different interpretations and understandings of the Christian message that are not officially recognized. This diversity enriches the religious panorama, but can also generate confusion and disputes. The influence of the Church on the canonization of the Scriptures leads us to think about the relationship between faith and authority. How can decisions made by a group of people impact the beliefs of millions? This question is fundamental to understanding the evolution of religious traditions and the role of the Church in history. Jesus' prophecies are often seen in a very clear way, but there are alternative interpretations that challenge this traditional view. Some of these interpretations suggest that Jesus' messages were broader than most believers realize. Rather than being limited to future events, these prophecies could be addressing current social and spiritual issues. For example, when analyzing the prophecies in a historical context, many scholars argue that Jesus was referring to the difficulties faced by the people at that time. Thus, the messages could be interpreted as a call to action, encouraging their followers to engage in social change, rather than just hoping for a messianic future. This approach opens up space for a more active understanding of faith. Another alternative interpretation is that Jesus' prophecies do not just refer to specific events, but to universal principles that apply in different eras. This means that rather than focusing on predictions, these messages can be seen as moral lessons that remain relevant today. This perspective can enrich Christian practice, making it more applicable to everyday life. Furthermore, some religious currents have their own interpretations of Jesus' prophecies, taking into account their beliefs and traditions. This demonstrates how diversity of thought within Christianity can result in a variety of understandings and practices. This plurality is a rich and fascinating feature of the Christian faith. Alternative interpretations of Jesus' prophecies invite us to deepen our understanding of his message. Rather than accepting a single view, we can explore different angles and thus find meanings that resonate uniquely in our own spiritual lives. The prophecies contained in the Gospels and elsewhere in the Bible are often deeply rooted in the historical and political context of the time. To understand these messages, it is essential to consider the setting in which they were uttered. For example, Jesus lived during a period of great political upheaval under Roman rule. This influenced not only the content of the prophecies, but also the way they were received by the population of the time. Religious leaders such as the Pharisees and Sadducees were in constant conflict over the interpretation of God's law and promises. Roman oppression and the expectation of a Messiah who would free the people also shaped the understanding of the prophecies. Many people expected a military leader, while Jesus brought a message of peace and love, which generated strangeness and resistance among the most fervent. Furthermore, the social and economic context cannot be ignored. Poverty, injustice, and daily oppression of the Hebrew people created fertile ground for hope for meaningful change. The prophecies that Jesus shared, therefore, were not just predictions of the future, but also comments on the reality experienced by those who heard him. This helped form an emotional connection to his words. Messianic expectations also varied, reflecting different groups and their needs. These historical and political elements not only influenced what was prophesied, but also how these prophecies were interpreted over time. Therefore, understanding the context is essential to capture the full depth of the messages that Jesus left. Analysis of this historical scenario helps us realize that the prophecies were not isolated, but part of a continuous dialogue between God and his people, who sought answers and hope in difficult times. This understanding enriches our reading of Scripture and allows us to appreciate the nuances of prophetic messages. The parables and symbols that Jesus used in his teachings are a fascinating part of Scripture. These short narratives, full of visual images, had a clear purpose: to convey profound truths in an accessible way. By using everyday elements such as sowing seeds or a shepherd's care for his sheep, Jesus was able to connect with the experiences and reality of his audience. An interesting aspect of the parables is that, although they were simple in form, they often contained multi-sided meanings. This meant that, depending on the listener's perspective, the same parable could offer different lessons. This approach allowed messages to reach people of diverse backgrounds and levels of understanding, challenging them to reflect more deeply on their own lives. Symbols, in turn, were another powerful tool. They not only embellished speech, but also functioned as keys to understanding spiritual truths. For example, the metaphor of light and darkness appears in several passages, symbolizing truth and ignorance, respectively. These symbols created a space for listeners to seek the deeper meaning of Jesus' words. Furthermore, many of Jesus' symbols and parables have roots in the Old Testament, which indicates a continuity in God's message throughout history. This suggests that by using these tools, Jesus was not only teaching but also fulfilling and reinterpreting previous promises and prophecies. This interweaving of narratives enriches the understanding of the Christian message. The richness of the parables and symbols invites us to an ongoing dialogue with the Scriptures. Each time we read these passages, we can discover new meanings and applications for our lives by reflecting on how these teachings apply to our current context. This search for understanding makes reading the Bible an ever-renewing and intriguing journey. When talking about Jesus' prophecies, it is interesting to make a comparison with other apocalyptic scriptures. These scriptures, which address end-of-time themes and divine revelations, appear in different religious traditions. A notable example is Daniel's visions, which also speak of future events and the final judgment. As in Daniel, Jesus' prophecies often use vivid symbols and images to convey profound messages. Furthermore, the book of Revelation, which is part of the New Testament, presents a rich tapestry of symbology. In it, John, the author, describes visions that reflect the challenges faced by the Christian community at the time. The apocalyptic language used in this book has similarities with the language found in Jesus' speeches, especially in relation to judgment and the hope of a new kingdom. This leads many scholars to wonder to what extent Jesus' words may have been influenced by these other traditions. Another scripture that deserves attention is the book of Enoch, a text that was not included in the Bible, but which contains apocalyptic narratives about judgment and the coming of a Messiah. Ideas about retribution and the role of messianic figures that appear in Enoch may have resonated with Jesus' prophecies. This connection suggests a dialogue between traditions, where expectations about the future and the divine intertwine. Furthermore, we can observe that Jewish apocalyptic literature, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, also presents similar themes. The texts found at Qumran reveal a concern with salvation and damnation, in addition to a messianic expectation. This apocalyptic atmosphere of the period may have shaped the way Jesus communicated with his followers about the events to come. When comparing Jesus' prophecies with other apocalyptic scriptures, we notice that, despite cultural and historical differences, there is a common thread of hope and warning. The messages about divine justice and the renewal of the world are universal. This comparison not only enriches our understanding of Jesus' prophecies, but also invites us to reflect on the continuity of apocalyptic ideas throughout history and in different religious traditions. And so we come to the end of this intriguing journey through the censored prophecies of Jesus. But before we close, it's time to reflect. What do these hidden revelations really mean for us today? Has the Church hidden truths that could transform our understanding of life, death, and what comes after? Imagine living in a world where these prophecies came true. How would this change your view on spirituality in the future? The messages that were silenced may be closer than we think, and what about the forces that work to keep these truths from our eyes? If you're intrigued by what we discussed here, don't forget to leave your comment. What other theories about Jesus would you like to explore? What hidden mysteries do you believe are yet to come? The search for hidden knowledge never ends, and each question leads to new discoveries. So, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. After all, truth may be stranger than fiction, and what we know about Jesus may just be the tip of the iceberg. Until next time.